spread around social media. Her goal was to raise £30,000, but she beat that in no time, getting even more money to give to Robbie and the rest of the homeless people in her town. In 2011, Victor Geisbeck pulled over on the highway to help two girls change their flat tire because no one else would stop for them. Then he continued on his way without expecting anything in return. The two girls then saw his truck pulled over on the side of the road, so they stopped to check on him, and were shocked to find him in the middle of a heart attack. But luckily, one of the girls was a nurse and immediately began CPR, saving his life. This picture is not what you think it is. At first, it looks like a fish on a plate, but if you tilt your head to the side, it's actually a lady. Everyday items that prisons have banned, and why. Gum has been banned for a few reasons, but one of them is because it can be used to jam the cell door's lock. So when a guard tries to lock it, it won't, and the prisoner can get out. A lot of prisoners spend time drawing or writing on paper, and although that's allowed, they can't have a notebook that has a spiral. You may think it's because it could be made into a weapon, which is true, but it could also be used to pick a lock. Finally, in lots of prisons, you're not allowed to have a hardback book, because they could be a good hiding place for a weapon, which has been done before. But another reason is because a big book like Harry Potter, for example, would hurt if someone was hit in the back of the head with it. Here's how a vending machine actually works. When you place a coin in the machine, light sensors determine the size and electromagnets detect the metal type to identify the coins, then source them into columns. And if it's a fake, it goes into the reject chute. When it needs to give change, it releases one coin carefully at a time into the chute. When you press a key, a computer orders one of the 32 motors to turn the spiral 360 degrees. Then as the snack falls, it hits a line of 10 infrared beams. If nothing crosses the beams, then the computer orders the coils to turn another 360 degrees until something does. This girl got messages from her stalker every night, and you won't believe what happened when she figured out what they meant. One night, when 17-year-old Tana was babysitting, she heard a knock on the door, so she figured it was just the parents coming home early. But when she looked out the window, she saw a creepy old man, so she decided not to open it. Fast forward almost a year later, when she was working at her new job at Subway, the old man walked in. He sat down and stared at the girl for 2 hours. Then a few days later, she started receiving one-word text messages from unknown numbers. One night when she was working, her manager left to run some errands, so she was there by herself. And that's when the old man walked in. A few seconds later, she got another one-word text message. Then the old man told her to look at her phone. Tana decided to run to the back of the store and lock the door. And that's when she realized all the text messages put together read, "I will make you pay." Right when she decided to dial 911, the old man started banging on the door. She decided to run out the back door and make a run for her car. But by the time she got to the front of the store, thankfully the police had already arrived. But the scariest part is they found the old man sitting in the back of her unlocked car. If you see an Apple AirTag that isn't yours, call the police immediately. If you don't know what it is, it's a small tracker made by Apple that's meant to be put on keys, wallets, backpacks, or whatever you don't want to lose. So if you do lose them, your phone will tell you where it is. But one man put an AirTag in a girl's jacket without her knowing. She said she took off her jacket at a restaurant, and that's when it happened. It tracked her go from one restaurant to another, and even while she was walking home alone. Luckily, Apple has a safety feature that notifies you if an AirTag that isn't yours is tracking you. So she was able to find it and throw it away, but that isn't always the case. This lady was followed from the mall to her house. And again, she got a notification that told her that, but she couldn't find it. She figured it had to be somewhere on her car, so she brought it to a shop and mechanics looked it over. But they said that they couldn't find it, so be safe. This story sounds fake, but it's 100% real. In 2013, Jim Stouffer's mother passed away from Alzheimer's at the age of 74. Doctors told Jim that the disease mutated in a way that they had never seen before, and asked if he was willing to donate her body for brain research. Jim decided to donate it to the Biological Resource Center in Phoenix, which removes body parts for scientific research, then cremates the rest and returns the ashes to the family members. Jim received his mother's ashes, but without specifying what was done to her body. A year later, the center was raided by the FBI, after hearing accusations that they were selling the donated bodies for profit. And among them was Jim's mother, who was sold for $5,893. It turns out that the bodies were actually used for US military experiments. And according to investigations, Jim's mother's body was strapped to a chair that was then detonated by a bomb underneath it to understand the effects on a body when a vehicle is hit by an explosive device. Jim and others who were affected sued the center, and in 2019 they were awarded $58 million for the damage, with the center being no longer in operation. 5 Disney secrets you didn't know. If you look closely, some scenes from different Disney movies are quite similar. This is because the drawings were made by hand, and the animators only make a few changes to create a new scene. Lilo's voice belongs to the actress who played the role of Samara Morgan in the movie The Ring. Since Walt Disney wanted to spend most of his free time at Disneyland, he created a secret apartment on the 2nd floor of the fire station on Main Street, located on the famous avenue that leads to the park's Central Plaza. The name of the wizard in the movie Fantasia is Yensen, which is Disney in reverse. Simba means lion in the Swahili language, and Boo's real name is Mary because the person who plays her is called Mary Gibbs. Finally, Walt ordered to build a bunch of tunnels underneath the park to allow the actors to get from place to place without the public noticing, so they wouldn't lose the magic of the place. two prison guards who were saved by inmates. In this footage from 2015, 17-year-old Jamal Lutridge is being processed at Fort Lauderdale Police Department. As the officer is booking the teenager for burglary, he gets a pain in his chest and collapses onto the floor. The boy looks around and realizes they're alone, so he starts yelling and kicking on the door to get some help, and ended up saving him from a potentially deadly heart attack. They even had a ceremony to honor him. Inmates from a jail in Georgia were at a cemetery watering the plants and cutting the grass. As the day went on, the guards started to hyperventilate due to the heat and collapsed, leaving the prisoners there without any guards. They could have easily ran away, but they didn't. 6 of the prisoners rushed immediately to help the guard. They took off his bulletproof vest so he could breathe better, and one of them grabbed his phone to call 911. And because they saved a life, all 6 of them got their sentences reduced by a quarter. The school bus that mysteriously disappeared. In 1976 in Chowchilla, California, 26 children between the ages of 5 and 14 were on their way home on the school bus when they were kidnapped along with the driver. Frederick Newhall Woods and brothers James and Richard Schoenfeld came up with an evil plan because they didn't have much money. The school bus left at the same usual time, but on the way, a van pulled up in front of them, and inside were the 3 men with masks and guns. Once they got control of the bus, they drove for about 12 hours to a quarry 100 miles from Chowchilla. When they arrived, the kidnappers took out the hostages one by one and told them to climb down a ladder that apparently led to a buried trailer. They didn't have good ventilation, so they were suffocating. And after 16 hours, the bus driver and the older boys piled up mattresses to get to the only place out, then moved a metal lid the kidnappers had placed and dug to the surface, managing to get out from underground. When they got to the surface, the 3 men were sleeping, so it was an easy escape. And 2 weeks after the kidnapping, the 3 men were arrested. Things your parents told you that are actually false. Number 1, carrots help you see in the dark. Carrots are full of vitamin A, which helps maintain eyesight but won't give you night vision. Number 2, Fruit Loops have different flavors based on their color, but in reality all Fruit Loops taste the same. Number 3, dropping a penny from the Empire State Building can kill someone that's standing below, but a penny can't get that much speed to do that. Number 4, all chocolate is bad for your health, but dark chocolate in small amounts can be beneficial for your health. Number 5, oranges are always orange. Some oranges stay green to protect them from the sun. Number 6, the humps on camels store water. What they actually do is store fat. Why making fun of this guy can get you life in prison. In Thailand, you can go to jail for 3 to 15 years if you defame, insult, threaten, or criticize the king of Thailand, his wife, and close relatives because it's illegal. The 3 to 15 years will be for each insult the person makes. Here are some examples. In 2007, a Swiss man got drunk in Thailand and spray painted portraits of the king for fun. He was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison. In 2008, an Australian wrote a book about the scandalous romances of the Thai royal court and was arrested when they arrived at the Bangkok airport during a trip to the country, sentenced to 3 years in prison. In 2009, a Thai woman was arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison after giving a speech where she mentioned the royal court and they found it offensive. Finally, in 2017, a 34-year-old man created 10 Facebook posts that were insulting to the royal family, and he was sentenced to 70 years in prison, giving him 7 years for each post. Amazing treasures that were found by accident. In 2006, a fisherman got his anchor stuck on a giant clam and soon realized there was a large pearl inside of it. 10 years later, he gave it to his aunt, who gave it to the mayor to show off at a museum. They then realized how valuable the pearl was, because the pearl weighed 34 kilograms and was 30 centimeters wide by 67 centimeters long, with a value estimated to be around $100 million. The crater of diamonds is located in Arkansas and is open to the public so they can go and find their own diamonds. In 1924, W.O. Basham was lucky enough to find an 8-gram diamond, which became the largest ever found in the United States, and in 1971 it was sold for $880,000. According to an urban legend, Atari threw out a bunch of its systems into a garbage dump, so Joe Lewandowski, the owner of the garbage company, found records of where the garbage went and invested $50,000 into a search. It turns out that the legend was real and he was able to sell them all over the world for almost $108,000. Scary experiments that could have ended the world. In 1970, the Soviet Union began digging a hole in Russia to try and drill into the Earth's crust to see what was underneath. But according to scientists, drilling this deep would dislodge so much rock so quickly that it would trigger systemic forces like never seen before. But after digging for 12 kilometers, they gave up due to high temperatures. In 1989, a Soviet defector informed the British embassy that the Soviet Union was preparing biological weapons, using deadly pathogenic microorganisms. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the weapons were never used, and if they had been, you might not be watching this, because they would have wiped out most of the world's population. And finally, it was said that when the Soviets were creating biological weapons to harm humans, Americans wanted to use fungi to damage crops with the intention of removing the food supply of the entire country. The problem is, if they did so, the fungus would have spread to not only the country but to the entire world. Why squeezing your pimples is a bad idea. Our body always tells us when something's wrong. That's why when the pores of our skin become clogged and infected with bacteria, we get a red, lumpy, pus-filled pimple. Trying to make it go away faster by popping it is a terrible idea. The pressure you apply by squeezing your pimple will force the pus outwards, tearing your skin, creating a new wound that can easily turn into a scar. You're also likely to worsen the wound by adding new bacteria from your hands, because at least 150 types of bacteria are on your hands even when you think they're clean. Another thing that could happen is if you don't remove the entire pimple and accidentally push some dirt inside it, you can get an even bigger pimple and increase the chances of it being infected. If you have lots of acne, it's better to go to a specialist who knows how to treat them, and if you only have a bit, just wait for it to go away on its own. The 5 most funny design fails. This is an ad for the mattress, but the guy isn't even laying on it. In order to use these scissors, the instructions say to cut the cable with scissors. You would think the inside of the left one is blue and the inside of the right one is red, but it's actually the opposite. On the red one you could see it says blue. This maze is called amazing, but it's not really amazing, because the only end and finish is right here. Now before I show you the craziest one, I found this app that lets you prank your friends and family by changing their text messages. Just press the button on my profile to get it. Finally, each animal says what to feed it to keep things separate. For example, the lion says feed me plastic and cans. But the thing is, those are terrible things to feed them and kids might actually think that's what they eat. A musical instrument that can be played without touching it. The theremin was invented by accident in 1920 by the Russian musician and scientist Leon Theremin. He was creating a device that could measure the density of gases, but realized what he made produced sound that changed according to your hand position. The instrument consists of a box with 2 metal antennas on the sides and oscillators that control the frequency and amplitude of sound. The electrical signals produced by the instrument are then sent to a loudspeaker. The first antenna is on the right, which controls the pitch. The closer you place your hand, the sharper the sound is. The farther you move your hand away from the antenna, the louder it will be. The theremin has been used several times to create themes for television shows and was played in the 70s by Jimmy Page, who's the founder of the Led Zeppelin band. This boy lived in a bubble for 18 years. Jimmy Livingston was born with no immunity, so he had to be kept isolated. His parents made him a plastic bubble that he couldn't get out of, and they could only touch him with gloves. When he was 16, he was attracted to his neighbor Chloe, who he could see through his window. When his overprotected mom found out about this, she warned him that if he touched her, he would die. As the years went on, Jimmy and Chloe became friends, until one day Chloe gave him news that left him really sad. She would be leaving soon to marry her fiancé at Niagara Falls. Since Jimmy was in love with her, he decided to make a suit, so he could go outside and interrupt the wedding. A few days later, he arrived just in time to interrupt the wedding. Then he confessed his love for Chloe and got out of the suit and kissed her. His mother arrived just in time to see him and told everybody the truth. Jimmy was perfectly fine. She was just holding him captive to keep him away from the rest of the world. In the end, Jimmy forgives his mother and ends up marrying Chloe. This man has the longest nails in the world. Sridhar Shalal stopped cutting the nails on his left hand in 1952 when he was just 14 years old. His longest nail was on his thumb, measuring 197.8 centimeters long. In 2014, he got a Guinness World Record for having the longest nails in history on a single hand, with a total length of 909.6 centimeters. Having such long nails has been rewarding for him because of all the recognition he gets, but it's also brought him a lot of negative consequences because of the weight and length of the nails. For example, he has a permanent disability of his left hand, and a lot of pain in his fingers, wrist, elbow, and shoulder. But in July 2018, after 66 years without cutting his nails, he decided it was time to do it. They couldn't cut them with traditional nail clippers, so they had to use power tools. Now his nails are displayed in 2 different locations. 3 of them are at Ripley's Believe It or Not in New York, and the other 2 are at Ripley's Believe It or Not in Amsterdam. Chilling facts about the Titanic that you didn't know. In 1912, on April 14th at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic hit an iceberg causing damage to the ship, and after a couple hours it broke in 2 and sank completely. While the ship was sinking, the crew sent emergency signals that were picked up by 2 ships. The SS Californian, which was the closest to the Titanic, and the RMS Carpathia, which was farther away. The Carpathia was the one that came and saved the passengers who survived the sinking. But if the Californian had responded to the emergency call, it could have saved more lives or even all of them. The Titanic had the capacity for 64 lifeboats, but in the end only 20 boats were used. The actual number of people who passed away is unknown, but it's estimated that there was around 1,518 people. The names of all the passengers are also unknown. In the investigations, they found out that lots of them were traveling under false names, which is why some of the tombstones have no names. This 6-year-old boy became the youngest soldier in World War II. Sergei Aleshkov, a 6-year-old boy, was orphaned during World War II after German troops arrived and killed everyone in his village, including his mother and brother. Sergei managed to escape with the help of a neighbor and quickly ran into the forest. After a few days, he was found by Soviet scouts who took him to a shelter led by Major Kozelski. Kozelski decided to leave him with the battle troops, and he was soon adopted by Mikhail Vorobyov, who didn't want to send him to an orphanage. Sergei didn't take part in combat operations. Instead, he had tasks like delivering letters and newspapers. He also brought the soldiers whatever they needed, including water, ammo, and grenades. But one of the times he went to deliver the newspaper, he saw suspicious people in a haystack and informed the artillery commander. The people turned out to be German spies who were then neutralized. After the war, Vorobyov raised Sergei, who later got married, had 2 children, and passed away in 1990. Unsolved mysteries that have footage. On March 31st, 2006, medical student Brian Schaffer disappeared in the middle of the night when he was with his friends at a bar named Ugly Tuna. That was the last time he was ever seen, and the bar's surveillance camera served as evidence. It shows Brian talking outside the bar before going back inside, but he was never seen leaving. Detectives found no trace of Brian, nor did any other surveillance cameras around the site. Some people say the cameras weren't working or they were manipulated, but so far nobody knows anything. On March 18th, 2009, Claudia Lawrence had a phone call with her mother, and that was the last time they spoke. The next day, day, she didn't arrive at work and no one heard from her since. The police discovered that only her purse, phone, and chef's uniform were missing from her house, so they thought she went to work like usual. Surveillance camera footage from the street next to her house shows a suspicious man dressed in black walking around her house around 7:15 p.m. He then disappeared, then a minute later reappears with a bag, then stops walking when he notices someone, then continues walking after they leave. But no one knows if he had anything to do with her disappearance. Here's how to become the world's first trillionaire. The competition to be the richest person in the world right now has been in between Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. But this could change in the future because of an industry that hasn't yet been started, which is asteroid mining. Gold, silver, palladium, platinum, and much more can be extracted from asteroids between Mars and Jupiter. For example, the asteroid 16 Psyche has enough supply of ferronickel for the whole world to last for millions of years. The person who starts this industry will make money like never seen before without even traveling that far, because there's valuable asteroids close to Earth, like the 162,173 Ryugu, which is estimated at $83 billion. So far, no one's been able to pull it off because taking things to space is really expensive. And the most important question is, how are they going to extract the metals from the asteroids? Chilling last photos before they went missing. Andrew Macaulay's last photo was a self-portrait taken while he was alone in his kayak in the middle of the ocean. At the age of 39, he set out on a journey to be the first person to kayak from Australia to New Zealand. Unfortunately, even though he prepared for 10 years, he was unable to make it. His kayak and camera were found, but there was no trace of him. He was most likely capsized from a wave separating him from his kayak and ended up dying from hypothermia in the middle of the ocean. Chris Creamers and Lisanne Froon. In this photo, they're both smiling at the camera with the mountains of El Pionista Trail in the background. On April 1st, 2014, they were preparing to go on the trail. After the trail, the family that was hosting was concerned because they hadn't returned, so they looked around but they couldn't find them. Days later, on the same trail, they found parts of their decomposed bodies. They think they had a fatal accident, but to this day their deaths remain a mystery. How KFC was made from a gas station recipe. When Harlan Sanders was 6 years old, his father passed away, so his mother had to work while he took care of his siblings. In 1930, he got offered a job at the Shell Oil Company to manage a gas station. He quickly got the idea to make more money by making food for drivers passing through the gas station. His food, especially his fried chicken, became very famous. He came up with a technique to reduce the cooking time of the chicken, and also experimented with different spices until he got the flavor that he wanted. He then called it the secret blend of 11 herbs and spices. In 1950, he had to sell his place because of the construction of a new highway which decreased his customers, which decreased his sales, leaving him in debt. After this, he got the great idea to create the franchise Kentucky Fried Chicken. He drove around the country selling his recipe and preparation technique to different companies in exchange for 4 cents per one chicken sold. By 1963, there are more than 600 franchises throughout United States and Canada. And finally, when he was 73 years old, he sold his franchise to an investment group for what would be over $14 million today. The scariest coincidence is caught on camera. In Pennsylvania, a body was found by the police in a river while reporters surrounded the area trying to figure out what was happening. One of the reporters interviewed a man named Matthew that lived by the area. When she asked him about the situation, he seemed really surprised and said that he had no idea what had happened. He said it was sad and a good place to hide a body. A few hours later, the police discovered that the body was Matthew's mother. He was later arrested after the police found out that he was in possession of the same tarp that the body was wrapped up in. He was then sentenced to 14 years in prison. The event that started World War I was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand from Austria, which took place when he was being driven away in a limousine. The most disturbing coincidence was the license plate. The license plate number was A111118, which could also be read as November 11th, 1918, which is the date that World War I was agreed on. Why North Korea is the hardest country to escape. Since Kim Jong-un took power in North Korea, it's become harder and harder to cross the North Korean border. When his father was in charge, the number of people who crossed the border was higher because the border security was less tight. They could simply bribe the local border control and they would let them pass into China. But when Kim Jong-un realized this, he decided to tighten the security. And now the border patrol can shoot anyone that tries to cross the border. He also had an electric barbed wire fence installed across the border. There's lots of escape routes, but they're all really dangerous. If anyone manages to reach China, they'll have to stay in hiding because if they're found by the authorities, they'll be sent back to North Korea where they'll be accused of being spies. So instead they have to reach a country where they won't be deported, which is Thailand. When they arrive in Thailand, they must turn themselves in to the authorities to be transferred to that country. It can take them between 2 to 6 months to complete this escape, but the people who decide to do it prefer to take the risk rather than continue living in North Korea. Miracles people claim to have caught on tape. On Route 385 in Memphis, Tennessee, a driver lost control of his Jeep and went off the road. The car was immediately engulfed with flames. The driver escaped unharmed, but the curious thing is the police found a Bible that was untouched by the fire. It was perfectly fine even though the car was almost in ashes. In the Philippines, a little girl woke up at her funeral. Apparently she was ill and had a high fever which caused her to go into a coma. But the doctors didn't know that and declared her dead the day before her funeral. But luckily her relatives found out in time. Prahlad Yani was a Hindu ascetic who claimed he hadn't eaten or drank anything in over 70 years. Specialists in the scientific department put him in hospital for 15 days under 24-hour supervision and claimed he hadn't eaten or drank anything in those 15 days. According to the man, this can be achieved by meditation and a divine blessing. Secrets the royal guards don't want you to know. They wear those long black hats to appear taller and more intimidating. If they have to go to the bathroom, they have to do it while standing there because they're not allowed to leave their position. They're allowed to move while on duty, but they're only allowed to take 15 steps every 10 minutes because standing in one place for too long is bad for their health. If you see them marching towards you, you better get out of the way because they'll either carry you away or yell, "Make way for the Queen's guards." Their weapons are usually empty unless there's a threat or an emergency. They're trained to feint in the right way so they don't make a ruckus, which is why if any of them feint, they'll feint forwards and onto their face. They're not allowed to smile or laugh, and if they do, they get $200 taken off their salary. That's why they always have a serious attitude even when tourists try to make them laugh. This 5-year-old girl disappeared every night until her father followed her to this house. It took 4 days for Tom, who's Annie's father, to realize that she wasn't in her room or in the backyard where she always played. When the girl finally showed up, he asked where she was, but she didn't say a word. On the 5th day, Tom decides to follow her without her noticing, but he loses sight of her. On the 6th day, he tries again and this time manages to follow her to her grandparents' abandoned house. He stayed hidden while he watched his daughter greet a female stranger. He then waits for his daughter to leave, then walks up to the stranger and questions her. She was an 80-year-old lady named Linda who ran away from her nursing home because she didn't want to live there. So she wandered the streets with dogs that she adopted until she met the girl who provided her with shelter and met her every day at the same time to give her food. Eventually, Annie's parents gave the house to Linda and later with the help of donations turned it into an animal shelter. He built a secret home in the corner of the mall and lived there for 4 years before being discovered. While Providence Place Mall was under construction, Michael Townsend, who's an American artist, was running around the site when he noticed a section that made no sense. It was an opening between 2 walls that led to a space too small to be a store and too angular to be part of the parking lot. But he continued on his run. 4 years later, him and his friends were forced to leave the place that they were living because it was going to be destroyed and replaced with a parking lot. Because of this, he got an idea and remembered the space that he had seen years ago. That's when him and his friends got to work and cleaned up the space. They decorated it and took electricity from the mall for a TV and video games. The only thing they didn't have is a bathroom, but they were caught 4 years later, and they all went to trial for trespassing and many other charges, but the judge made the decision to let them go on probation. Sneaky ways airports get you to spend more money. The first thing they do is put the parking ticket at a high price. It's cheaper if you park at a nearby hotel or get a ride by a bus or cab. They also ask you to arrive early to avoid missing your flight. So after checking in and going through security, you'll feel relieved and ready to wait for boarding. And you'll also have plenty of free time to shop. Airports take advantage of this by placing lots of stores in your way, like coffee shops, convenience stores, and restaurants. Most commonly, more stores will be on your right, because most people are right-handed and they tend to look that way more often. Finally, you'll find eye-catching and spacious stores to attract your attention, so you can walk right through with your luggage, while restaurants and cafes will have a quiet atmosphere to make you feel more comfortable and spend more money. This is a real scary McDonald's customer service story. A young girl who lived with her 3-year-old sister and her mother experienced a very frightening moment. One of her mother's cousins worked at a McDonald's near where they lived, so she often stays there after school while she waits for her mother to pick her up. One day while she was studying at McDonald's and taking care of her little sister who was playing in the playground, 2 strange-looking men walked in. One of them suddenly approached the girl and started asking her a bunch of questions, but she was really scared and didn't really answer them. A few minutes later, she looked out to see her sister, but she wasn't there. She quickly got up to look for her and realized that the other man was in the parking lot trying to get her sister into the car while she was kicking and screaming. The girl ran to her mom's cousin and told him to call 911, but the man who was taking her sister gave up when he saw several employees approaching him and left the girl on the ground. If she hadn't acted quickly, she may never have seen her sister again. 5 People Who Beat the System Part 5. At this resort, you're not allowed to have drinks by the pool, so they made a massive straw and left the drink on their balcony. This guy said his name was Mark, spelt with a C, so instead of changing the K to a C, they changed the M to a C. The teacher told them they could only have a one-sided cheat sheet, so this student taped the paper to make both sides one side. This guy's girlfriend told him to wear a plain tie, so he sent her this picture of a tie with planes. Now before I show you the smartest one, I found a really addicting app that lets you create games to play with your friends, and also play millions of other games created by other players. Just press a button on my profile to get it. Finally, this town wasn't allowed to have a statue so close to the road, so they put a flag in it to make it a flagpole. 7 random facts you'll hear for the first time. The bones of mice are extremely flexible, so much so that they can even fit into the hole of a pen. Stop signs were yellow until they were changed into red in 1954. The defense mechanism for the mimic octopus is insane. It can change color and take on the shape of another animal, like sea snakes, flounders, or lionfish. The hole in the middle of a spaghetti spoon isn't only to drain water, it's also used to measure a portion for one person. The hottest place inhabited by humans is Dalol, Ethiopia, where temperatures have reached 49 degrees Celsius. The only letter in the English alphabet that isn't in the periodic table is J. When tea was first marketed, the beverage was placed in hand-sewn cloth bags. The idea was that the consumers would pull the leaves out of the bag, but they didn't know that and used it that way. They were a success and are still used like that. These simple objects had a secret from you in plain sight. The marks on the side of coins haven't always been there. In the 18th century, people were saving coins to make new ones, which is clearly illegal. So to stop this, they began engraving the sides to prevent them from being manipulated, which worked. The ring on cans lets people put their cigarettes there, but also if you have a painting that's fallen, because one of the hooks detached, you can can screw the ring into the painting and hang it again. Water bottles can be used to create a small greenhouse. Just cut the bottom and you can watch the seed grow. The Orbit chewing gum has a secret hidden in the logo. The round shape of the O has two colors. The light one represents day and the dark one represents night, just like our planet orbiting the sun. And finally, if you place garlic cloves in the microwave for 10 seconds, the husk will separate so you don't have to peel it with your hands. Gadgets that give you superpowers. MYO is a bracelet made by Telmic Labs. It allows you to control your electronics with simple gestures. The sensors detect the movements in your arm muscles, and some of its functions are you can control the volume of your music, you can control drones, and you could also play games without the joystick. If you've ever wanted to throw fire with your hands, you can with the Pyro Mini Flamethrower. You put it on your wrist and it lets you throw sparks, flames, and fireballs. It does this by quickly burning tissue. The exoskeleton is a full bodysuit. It has integrated weapons, it's bulletproof, it increases your mobility and strength by taking the stress off your joints and muscles, which even allows people in wheelchairs to stand up and walk. Here's what would happen if you fell off a cruise ship. In 2018, a British lady was on the Norwegian Star cruise ship when she suddenly fell off the back. As soon as the crew found out about this, they started a search and rescue for her. They also called the authorities, who sent water patrol, an aircraft, and 2 rescue boats to find her. After 10 hours, they managed to find her and quickly took her to the hospital. The chances of survival are slim, but she has several things in her favor. Because she worked as a flight attendant, so she probably knew what to do in this situation. Even though these accidents aren't very common, they have emergency protocols in place. If there's an eyewitness who can report what happened, the crew notifies the captain, who usually stops the ship and backs it up. The authorities and the Coast Guard are then notified, while the crew searches for the spot where the person fell off. If you ever fall overboard, it's important to stay calm, try to stay where you fell, don't drink seawater, and keep your clothes on. Secret Places Hidden in Famous Locations Part 2. In the Statue of Liberty, there's a small room located inside the torch, but no one can enter it because that part was damaged by the Germans in 1916. And although it was prepared, they don't allow people in